Wow! The sunny beaches of Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. 3 fun-filled dates and fantasy suites. Michelle asks the tough questions, and it's episode 8 of Michelle Young's Journey to Find Love on Rose Therapy. We finally leave Minnesota for the sunny Celulita, which is where Bachelor in Paradise is located. But instead, Michelle is filming at Punta Nayte, and it looks to be the Four Seasons for me because I have actually been to both of these places, and they're not the same beach. They're about a half an hour away from each other. But where Michelle is staying in Punta Nayte is more where the boats are and the docks are. Anyway, it's a beautiful resort, and there's amazing restaurants where the final rose ceremony is filmed. But the night starts off with 3 men realizing how awkward it is. We see some male jockeying for position, and let's look at these 3 men. They're pretty masculine types, right? Joe, Brandon, and Nayte. No one's going to show their hand. You get the sense that none of them is prepared emotionally. Now, Joe says,
relationships are getting more serious, and so we're not really friends because we're competing for the same girl. So now we're kind of went from bros to foes, and it is awkward, very awkward.
Bros now foes, which pretty much sums up the vibe of the night. For the first one-on-one is Brandon, and Brandon, he's one of the sweetest and most invested people we've seen on the show. You can't help but get caught up in how intense Brandon feels for Michelle. On the first part of the date, Brandon gets on his horse, and I'm yelling at my TV, Brandon, put your feet in the stirrups. Maybe Michelle herself, who has had some horse training, coaches Brandon because then finally they're off to the races. And on the evening portion of the date, Brandon is bubbling over with excitement. He's no longer falling in love, he's there. And he expresses all of it to Michelle. The fantasy suite they stay in is beautiful. And the food fight the next morning was another first. Brandon and Michelle certainly enjoy each other's company. But the biggest drama in the so-called house or palapa is that the men, each of them is questioning what's happening while they're waiting.
I'm just trying to stay distracted from thinking about what she's doing with Brandon, so yeah.
Cue the fireworks on Brandon's date. And how weird is that for Nayte and Joe to have to talk about it? What do you think's going on during the other person's date? Would men really ask these questions? I don't think so. Next up is Joe's one-on-one and the zipline date. My guess is that because they're in the hilly area, they've traveled somewhat south from the resort, and this excursion probably took them a while. But Joe's a good sport, and Michelle's a little bit surprised by how verbal Joe is. To be honest though, even though Joe has opened up tremendously, there's still something about him that's quite reserved. To me, it feels like Joe's just more of an introvert. He's a quiet type, and that's who he is. But what I like about the evening portion of all of Michelle's date is that she asks the 3 men the same questions, and she's very direct. Rumors are that Michelle cares only about an engagement, but this isn't a surprise because for every lead, the stakes are high. And while the lead themselves might have more control than the cast, they're worried too that what if one of the final 2 leaves or gets cold feet, and no one wants to be left at the proverbial altar with someone who's lukewarm. Now, let's get to the third date, the one-on-one date with Michelle and Nayte. And of course, according to Nayte, he's going to say,
think about it, I think third is the best spot to go.
But you have to admit, Michelle's pulling up on the yacht trumps the horse or the zipline date, because there's really just more time for snuggling and kissing and talking when they're not trying to keep up on a solo zipline or a horse. So Michelle is clearly attracted to Nayte. She's not wavered either. But to see she's slightly holding her breath, ever so slightly. Finally, during the dinner portion, when Nayte reveals that he's open to an engagement, do you see Michelle relax? But my question is, does Nayte respond because he feels forced, or is he legitimately there? In many ways, the cast does feel some pressure, right? This is all happening very quickly. But my only question is that, is Nayte in it for the camera's sake or the competition, or is he really into Michelle? But we've heard countless times from Michelle her biggest worry, that she likes someone more than they like her. And the jury's still out. What we can learn from this episode is that comparisons can be very helpful. And if we were to compare Brandon, Joe, and Nayte, you might say that Brandon's energy or his spirit is somewhat hot, right? He's all in, very emotional, very invested. Joe, on the other hand, is more cool, and I would say Nayte is warm. But Brandon, he's all in, clearly ready to commit to Michelle. And Joe is digging deep, but coming up a little bit short or just a little bit slower. And as I said, Nayte, I think, is somewhere in the middle. But boy, there are lots of opinions at this point about who your favorite might be. And some people are saying that Brandon's too sappy. Who would trust him? He's like a Hallmark card. Nayte is someone who has a bunch of red flags, that he's not ready. And Joe, why didn't he ever respond to Michelle's DMs? But just because people are looking a certain way, we don't know at the end of the day what they're really going to look like in a relationship. And then finally we get to the rose ceremony, and poor Brandon, he's been hearing so much about Joe and Nayte that his anxiety is palpable. And so he pulls Michelle aside to tell her he's there for her no matter what. And while Brandon's trying to say that he's doing this for Michelle's sake, it really felt like it was a way to quell his own anxiety. He needed some reassurance. Now, you might have to ask, did Brandon's move, his interruption, did it affect the other people? Well, clearly the guys were not happy about that, and I wouldn't have been either. But I don't believe that Brandon coming forward and interrupting made any difference in the outcome at all. Because back to Michelle's body language, she was never really into Joe as much as she was into Brandon and Nayte. Watch her body language. She also doesn't talk about Joe in the same way. She mentioned that she's falling in love with Brandon. She mentioned to Caitlin that she has no concerns about Brandon. She's talked about how crazy she is about Nayte and falling in love with him too. So when Joe goes home, it's no surprise. And let's face it, Joe's an attractive man who has a bright future. My guess is that this is not the end of Joe that we're going to see. But at this point, people are pretty polarized between Brandon and Nayte. Who's your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. But you've got to know that who your favorite is might be who you would want to be in a relationship with. And what I find so particularly interesting about attachment styles, it's through the lens of our own attachment style. So take, for example, you're a quiet, reserved type. Someone like Brandon might feel too much for you because you would feel flooded by someone like that. You would question their sappiness. Are they being legit? Their anxiety might be too much for you. Versus if you yourself are a more anxious or nervous person yourself, you might just adore this idea that it's so lovely that Brandon's so reassuring. So it has to do more with who you are and who you're going to be choosing your favorites. Now the question is then for Michelle, who would be the best partner for her? Now, that's hard for me to say too, because that answer depends, and it's going to depend on a few things, as it does for all couples: how invested the couple is, how their lifestyles line up. Distance is always an issue on the show because that means moving a big life. And then what kind of communication skills. But I am confident to say that our queen has some good communication skills. And I do see that Brandon and Nayte are equally willing to talk things out. So I think we're off to a good start there. Now, let's come back next week when we're in Mexico again for the final rose. And I hear it's going to be one of the most dramatic ever. Let me know your thoughts in the comment below.